Hi, welcome to this week's episode of In the Hoods. This week we're going to be talking about the Upper East Side, specifically what I am going to call the Lower Upper East Side, which for the purposes of our conversation will on the west side of the neighborhood run from 72nd Street to 92nd Street, east to Lexington Avenue, on the east side of the neighborhood from 72nd Street to 79th Street, all the way to the East River. The reason I'm kind of cutting it up is it kind of fits together with Yorkville and Carnegie Hill, which are also Upper East Side neighborhoods, but very different and deserve their own little video. The Upper East Side has long been considered one of the more affluent neighborhoods in New York City, and certainly between Fifth Avenue and Central Park and Lexington Avenue, that holds true. And it used to be the area where nice people lived. Particularly 72nd Street was, the 70s were considered a prime destination to live in, and it was considered a nice neighborhood. Further east became more middle class, and you had tenement housing and more affordable housing, whereas between Lexington Avenue and Fifth Avenue, you had apartment buildings, but they were largely cooperative buildings or townhouses. There were townhouses too, a few brownstones. It was really for the carriage trade. Interestingly, in this history of Manhattan, in the early 1800s, they built the railroad that runs underneath Park Avenue. But for a long time, this was not covered. It was not a tunnel. It was open, and nobody wanted to live on Park Avenue. The rail line was not covered until 1910 and created the Park Avenue we know today. And then you started seeing these fabulous apartment buildings being built, and they were inhabited by people who were definitely moneyed. First as rentals, and now I think they're probably all exclusively cooperative. As you get further east on 72nd, it becomes more, working class. And you had larger groups of people living under closer quarters. You have more commerce on the street, more stores, more little restaurants, diners. And it's an area that is transforming, much to my dismay. A few weeks ago, I was meeting some friends for dinner, and I took the new 2nd Avenue subway, which has opened in 2017, which runs up 2nd Avenue with stops at 63rd Street, 72nd Street, 86th Street, and 96th Street. And this has been a boon to the neighborhood, and particularly to developers. And walking up 2nd Avenue at night to meet my friends for dinner, I noticed it was so dark. Why was it so dark out here? And then I looked up at these 5-story buildings, because none of them were much more than 5 stories. And I noticed all these buildings were largely empty. Maybe you'd see one apartment light on, and that was your holdout, because the landlords have emptied the buildings. The commercial space is all vacant, which, given the pandemic, might have happened anyway. But these buildings are not long for this world. and I'd never realized how much of the ambient light on streets came from apartments. But this is an area that is about to undergo a huge transformation, and I suspect will shortly be full of very tall either luxury rental buildings or condominiums. But I've begun to have some peace with the turnover of Manhattan. This is what happens. People come, people go, and opportunity is created. In this instance, there is development opportunity. There's so little real estate in New York that can be developed because you're never going to be able to touch any of the properties between Park Avenue and Fifth Avenue. It's a beautiful area, wonderful for living. If you're close to, west of Lexington Avenue, you're close to Central Park. You have the Metropolitan Museum on 82nd Street and Fifth Avenue, which is fabulous. It's my favorite place in the world to visit, and it takes many, many days to see the whole thing. I love to drop in and just find an exhibit and enjoy one exhibit and then maybe hang out in the Middle Eastern art area or one of the lesser known galleries, so to avoid the crowds. But the Metropolitan Museum is really the beginning of Museum Mile. You also, in the 70s, I think about 76th Street, have the Frick Museum, which has been undergoing renovation, which has a fabulous collection of French art. And then it goes all the way up, which we'll be talking about more when we get to the Carnegie Hill area of Manhattan. In this area, you also have some very pretty churches. On Madison Avenue, you have St. James Episcopal Church, which is actually on 71st Street. Then going up to 73rd Street, you have Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church. It's an area that has been known primarily as a residential area, and very much used to be called the Silk Stocking District. I don't know whether it's as silk stocking as it used to be, but more later.